Hello everyone, welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissil, and today we're here to continue our deep dive series into the Chicago film industry. Today's part 9, and as always, we will be picking up from where we left off in this book right here, Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry. And this is by Michael Glover Smith and Adam Selzer, if you would like to read along with me here. So today we are doing Chapter 9, which is the Golden Age of Selig Polyscope. We will have this music playing in the background. Again, if it is too loud, let me know, but I think it'll be okay for today. Hey Jason, good to see you. So we have a few photographs here, and I guess like newspaper ad inserts. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, it keeps it a little more interesting, you know. That way when I'm not speaking, you have some music to hear while I'm gathering my thoughts. So Chapter 9 has a few photos that I think we'll show that at the end of the chapter. But there's 16 pages, so it's probably like 12 pages of actual text. But let's begin, shall we? Hey Donna. Wonder how many viewers know who you are. Alright. So Chapter 9, The Golden Age of Selig Polyscope. Even before Colonel Selig had established his enormous new motion picture plant in Chicago in 1907, he had begun looking at Southern California as a place to do location shooting. And he did open up a studio out in California eventually. As SNA had done, Selig Polyscope immediately upgraded the production values of its films by taking full advantage of its new studio facilities and creating historical epics with impressively designed costumes and sets. One of the most ambitious Selig productions after opening the new Chicago studio was an adaptation of Alexandre Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo, also known as Monte Cristo, which combined interior scenes shot in Chicago with exteriors from Southern California. Although actualities had been made in Southern California as early as the late 19th century, The Count of Monte Cristo was the first picture to effectively illustrate the superiority of Southern California's exterior locations. It was essentially the, quote, Big Bang, end quote, of Hollywood filmmaking. And we covered previously that the term actualities, it means what we call documentaries today. But they faked a lot of the wartime ones, as we learned earlier in the book. They passed off these studio-produced war films as actual war footage. And I believe that started with the Mexican War and the Spanish-American War. And they played along with it. So we've had a lot of propaganda, even going back then. Francis Boggs, a prominent Selig Polyscope director, made The Count of Monte Cristo in collaboration with cinematographer Thomas Persons. Hobart Bosworth, an acclaimed theatrical actor, was cast in the lead role of Edmond Dantes. Bosworth would eventually appear in more than 250 films and become known as, quote, the Dean of Hollywood, end quote. The scenes were finished in late 1907, and Boggs and his crew then departed for California, where the movie was completed in late 1907 or early 1908. The decision to shoot in California was entirely practical. It was the dead of winter in Chicago, and Lake Michigan would not have been conducive at the time to shooting the dramatic scene in which Dantes rises from the sea after escaping from prison. Yeah, that would be really chilly for the actor to do that. The scene was ultimately shot in the coastal California town of Laguna Beach, where the majestic rocky cliffs could provide an approximately dynamic setting. The Count of Monte Cristo was released to favorable reviews and considerable box office success at the end of January 1908. Some theaters charged extra money for admission merely on the grounds that it was a high-quality production. Perhaps more important, Colonel Selig was so pleased with the Laguna Beach footage that he immediately began plans to expand his empire by establishing a second film studio in California. In 1909, Selig Polyscope's The Heart of a Race Tout would be the first film shot entirely in Los Angeles County, although the subsequently filmed In the Sultan's Tower, that's a title, would actually be released a month earlier. Back in Chicago, Colonel Selig had begun a massive publicity campaign in an attempt to make motion pictures a more acceptable form of entertainment for people other than just the working class. As of 1907, the Daily Tribune was still vociferously against movies, fearing that they would lead children down a path to degradation. Quote, "There is no voice raised to defend the great majority of the 5-cent theaters," end quote, one Daily Tribune staffer opined. Quote, "Because they cannot be defended. They are hopelessly bad," end quote. I guess they like, if you were to put this in today's standards, they were calling this brain rot. Like, we don't need this brain rot getting into our children's minds. All of the silliness of falling down on skates and looking up the skirts of women scantily clad. And eventually, that would be a real issue going forward. Selig eventually fired back with a 5-page advertisement in the Chicago Daily News Almanac. Quote, "What moving pictures are giving the world, a moral and educational tonic for the young and old alike," end quote, in which he spoke in a voice like that of Professor Harold Hill to tout the educational virtues of movies. Just give me one moment here. Okay. Quote, the decision of the Supreme Court affirming the right of the mayor to censor the films and pictures exhibited in the cheaper as well as the more pretentious theaters, he wrote, cannot fail to gratify those of us who believe that the 5-cent moving picture shows are possibilities for a great deal of good in the community. Hours unemployed are the devil's opportunity. Hours of relaxation are beset with perils. If not properly utilized, they are apt to breed and to encourage vicious indulgence. The moving pictures show with Immortal Films eliminated. The moving picture show with Immortal Films eliminated is a valuable member of the company of modern devices so to direct the leisure hours of the young and old alike as to prevent their being wasted in frivolous and pernicious excitement of demoralizing entertainments. The 5 and 10 cent theater with its cinematographic plays is a most powerful rival of the saloon. Saloon keepers have reported that their transient trade has fallen off in districts well supplied with these shows. End quote. So the saloons were hurting because the theaters were taking people's attention. According to the ad, movies could even become the cure for society's ills. Quote, they will develop into agencies of great value in the domain of education and culture. End quote. After all, most men could not afford to travel far or often, and movies could take them anywhere for a dime. Slideshows were already used in schools, but, quote, even the lantern slide lacks the element of vitality which motion alone can supply. So they're talking about the still frame slides that were lit by lantern at the time. Towards the end of the ad, Selig becomes nearly rapturous. Quote, soon a new president will be inaugurated. Yesterday King George paid a visit to Emperor William. Soon our fleet will sail through the great Panama Canal on its voyage around the world. Sicily, devastated by earthquake, calls for sympathy. These and many more happenings will fill the columns of the newspapers. Their descriptions convey information, but for all that, they are deprived of the breath of life. The cinematograph has mastered the secret of power. It invites us to cheer the pageant or to shudder at the catastrophe as though we had been standing in the very street over which the procession passed or which the disaster overturned. It supplements the newspaper. It vivifies it. It brings history and geography within the very door of the house in which we live. End quote. He concludes with a third-person reference as though people had forgotten that the 5-page ad was written by him. With his logo appearing multiple times per page, no author was credited, but it was almost certainly written by Selig himself. Quote, with these great and glorious objects in view, the great redoubtable Selig stands as a beacon from whom radiates in fountains of knowledge the greatest educational factor ever given the world. End quote. So that's interesting. We have Selig that's advocating for educational films and the good use of films for that purpose. I can stand behind Selig on that one. He had his priorities straight. He was looking at it further than entertainment or even further than a business venture like Edison was. As was often the case, the Selig of this ad seemed to be able to see into the future. Few others imagined the vast educational or artistic powers of the movies as vividly as he did. Indeed, 1908 marked the beginning of an era of extraordinary innovation at Selig Polyscope. That was the year that they produced the first, quote, two-reeler, end quote, Damon and Pythias, the longest American motion picture ever made. So I'll spell that title out. DAMON and PYTHIAS. If you guys want to look that up. Also unique was Selig's collaboration with L. Frank Baum, the renowned author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and a photography enthusiast. Baum made a deal with Selig to produce the first of the Wizard of Oz films, which were shot at the Selig Polyscope studio in Chicago and then color tinted by hand. I believe that's like prior to the Judy Garland one, right? That has to be. I didn't even know there was a few more prior to that. Baum toured the country with them in a remarkable sounding live show, the Fairy Log and radio plays, which involved the authors interacting with the images on the screen. Fairy Log was a play on Burton Holmes' term travelogue, which Baum's shows in many ways resembled, and his use of the phrase, quote, radio plays, end quote, is fascinating. Radio play would not come into its more modern usage to describe an oral dramatization for another decade or so. The word radio was virtually unknown in 1908. It's pretty interesting. Baum once explained that the films had been color tinted in France by a man named Michael Radio, but that name seems to be just as much a fictional creation of Baum's as Dorothy and the Wizard. It is sometimes said that radio was a buzzword for anything, quote, high-tech, end quote, at the time. The way that cyber would be used in the 1990s. Cyberpunk. Matrix. Always comes back around to that, doesn't it? But the term hardly appears in print at all circa 1908 except in reference to radioactivity. The term radio play does not appear at all. Perhaps, as Selig sometimes had, Baum, whose imagination was greatly excited by the White City at the Chicago World's Fair, had caught a glimpse of the future. You know, that has me thinking, like, what if we have a new technology come out in about a decade from now, and we call it cyber? But we already have it, like, cyberpunk, that's all been described and everything, but, you know, you get what I'm saying. There's always room for rediscovered technology and innovation and all that. The show consisted of different filmed segments that had been credited to Selig's top directors, Francis Boggs and Otis Turner. In addition to the films, the 2-hour extravaganza also featured live actors, a choir, rear projection, and slideshows. And I think Stanley Kubrick ended up using rear projection. So he borrowed from some of this. I wonder when that started up here. Baum himself narrated, appearing in a white suit with tails. The Fairy Log and radio plays rolled into Chicago to play at Orchestra Hall in October 1908. Although the innovative multimedia nature of the show was years, even decades ahead of its time, newspaper reviews tended to brush off the whole enterprise as nothing more than an amusing novelty. As the Daily Tribune reviewer put it, quote, "The Scarecrow, Tin Woodsman, and a number of other pleasant characters returned to Chicago Thursday evening under the interesting circumstances. In the first place, they brought with them their creator, L. Frank Baum, who wore a lovely white frock coat and won the affections of a good-sized audience of children and grown-ups. In the second place, they added two perfectly good new words, fairy log and radio play, to the vocabulary of our already overworked press agents. A fairy log is a travelogue that takes you to Oz instead of China. A radio play is a fairy log with an orchestra. In a radio play, there is the added advantage of having a cast of characters before you and knowing just who impersonate the people on the stereopticon screen. The idea is a new one, and with Mr. Baum's charming whimsicalities as its basis, proved to be well worthwhile. End quote. I really like that. Baum himself had supervised the casting of the show and selected 8-year-old Romola Remus as Dorothy. In 1977, when she was living in Uptown, quote, with a menagerie that includes several cats, a parrot, a 35-year-old Pete the Turtle, unquote, she remembered the experience in an interview with the Chicago Tribune. Quote, I was very young, end quote, she said. Quote, but remember my mother taking me to the studio that day and saying, it's just another movie. I never would have dreamed that it would have amounted to anything more, end quote. When asked if she regretted not moving to Hollywood with the rest of the film and movie industry a few years later, she said she did not. Quote, what if I had made it as a star? It probably would have meant endless cocktail parties, which I think are boring because of all the phonies. End quote. I like this girl already. Romola Remus. And so they interviewed her when she was nearly 80. She was living with a parrot, a turtle, and cats. A couple of years earlier, Remus spoke about working with Baum and Selig. Quote, the privilege of knowing Dr. Baum, well, was a happy and rewarding experience for me. I also portrayed the role of Dorothy in the first Wizard of Oz movie. I believe it was the very first colored moving picture. It was produced by Selig's company. I remember Mr. Baum was always on hand offering encouragement or constructive criticism to all of his workers. When the film was shown at various theaters, he would lecture about his various books. I recall some proud and joyous moments standing beside this tall, gentle, dignified gentleman on stage after each matinee. The little children would clamor for his autograph with cheers of joy. End quote. Many historians writing about the fairy log and radio plays have fallen down a rabbit hole while researching the fascinating Romola Remus. Later, her name was Romola Dunlap, D-U-N-L-A-P. Her father, George, became a bootlegger, ended up murdering a lover, and is sometimes said to be the inspiration for F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. What a small world we live in, huh? In her later years, Remus often reminisced in newspapers about turn-of-the-century Chicago, once writing about meeting Robert Todd Lincoln with her father on Michigan Avenue. Unfortunately, the fairy log and radio plays film footage does not appear to survive today. Some say that it was incorporated into another Wizard of Oz movie that Selig made later, after Baum went bankrupt touring with the show, but this explanation is most likely apocryphal. As with 99% of the Selig Polyscope movies, it is probably a lost artifact. Man, that's... I don't like that. How can you lose all of this? Although the fairy log and radio plays shows were well attended, they were ultimately too expensive to produce to turn a profit, even though tickets cost from 25 cents to $1. After losing money on his grand experiment, Baum granted the movie rights to 3 of his Oz books to Selig in order to cover his debts. This arrangement resulted in Selig's producing another Oz adaptation, the still extant The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, also directed by Otis Turner in 1910. We'll have some stills to show from that here in the book later. Selig next turned his attention to a series of increasingly ambitious projects, including a return to the pseudo-documentary form that had brought him success a decade earlier. In 1908, Theodore Roosevelt had decided not to run for a third term as president. Instead, after his second term ended, he planned to go on a year-long safari in Africa. Selig boldly asked for permission to film the sojourn, and Roosevelt readily agreed. Roosevelt's son, Kermit, to operate a Selig Polyscope movie camera. The ex-president soon informed Selig, however, that he had changed his mind and that he did not want anyone filming the safari. Selig was then outraged to learn that Roosevelt had enlisted Cherry Kearton, an acclaimed wildlife photographer turned filmmaker, to document the journey. Selig then resolved, without ever leaving Chicago, to make a film of, quote, Roosevelt, unquote, hunting lions in Africa. In 1909, the pseudo documentary became a smash hit. Again, propaganda. Just said it was something it wasn't. Hunting Big Game in Africa, also known as Roosevelt in Africa, was shot entirely on the interior and exterior Selig Polyscope stages in Chicago, using a Roosevelt look-alike, quote, native drummers, unquote, found on the South State Street, bamboo fish poles, and artificial leaves. Anecdotal evidence, however, indicates that many viewers thought it was genuine footage of the adventures of former president. Or of the adventurous former president. And many theaters probably exhibited it under exactly that delusion. That's a very good word. Though Selig did not discourage anyone from thinking the film was real, he also made no secret of its being a fake. The filming of the movie was extensively documented, and a handful of feature articles about it were published, including one in the Daily Tribune that went into great detail for the benefit of a public that was still mostly in the dark as to how movies were made. Selig often had lions in the stable on his vast northwest side lot. According to legend, one of them went on to become the iconic lion in the MGM logo. But he brought in a new one just to be killed on camera for the movie. Dang. I wonder how much that cost at the time to purchase a lion like that. And there were probably no laws on killing him either. The film's jungle set was constructed in a 60 by 20 foot cage on the lot to the exacting specifications of the producer. Quote, "You've got to have the real color in a moving picture," he said. Quote, "We come as near to doing the real thing here as it can be done. Get ready for the hunt." End quote. In addition to the lion, the film also boasted a cast that included tigers, elephants, a baboon, and even a little lamb, all of which, according to Selig, quote, "were trained and posed to act their parts," end quote. According to most accounts, quote, "King Leo," end quote, the lion, was terrified of the set. He was bred in captivity and had never been anywhere near a jungle. He spent much of his time hiding in the artificial bushes, but his tracks gave him away. Yeah, think of this. They made a set that was 60 feet wide by 20 feet. Or no, 60 feet long by 20 feet wide. That's pretty significant. It's not some small studio or anything. But to be made just for this, that's pretty impressive there. As the Daily Tribune reporter put it, the man playing Roosevelt, quote, got down to examine the tracks, made sure it was a lion, then waved his arms in frantic delight. His false teeth gleamed some more, and the native tracker and ex-president shook hands, and Teddy said right out loud, "Delighted," end quote. By all accounts, Roosevelt spent much of the film shaking hands, smiling, and saying "delighted," while everyone did a lot of frantic waving around. Between shots, the lead actor would take out the false teeth and remark that they were a pain to wear. Quote, "It must be fierce to have them growing on you," end quote, he said. The poor lion, for his part, spent most... Wait, hold on a minute. So this is the teeth... This is an actor with no teeth? And he was talking about, like, it must be a pain for teeth to actually be grown. Alright. The poor lion, for his part, spent most of his time hiding, while the crew did its best to scare him into looking fierce for the 3 movie cameras. When the first shot, fired by an off-camera marksman, hit him in the jaw, the lion let loose a mighty roar and proceeded to scare the daylights out of the crew by jumping for the platform where the cameramen were stationed. The platform was 12 feet above the ground, but it seemed sufficiently likely that the lion would make the jump that the crew jumped down on the opposite side and ran. King Leo, however, hit the bars at about the 8-foot mark and fell to the ground. The cameramen then retook their positions and continued filming as the off-screen marksman fired 2 more shots that brought the lion down. Obviously, no title card would be claiming that no animals were hurt in the making of this motion picture. The film ended with the lion's carcass being skinned on camera, while Roosevelt grinned, shook hands, and said, "Delighted," end quote. Oh, well, we have an answer to the question I just asked earlier. The lion had cost Selig $300. Hunting Big Game in Africa, the title of the film, made the company about $15,000 in profits. Meanwhile, Pathé Frères released the Cherry Curtin movie consisting of actual footage of the Roosevelt safari, but it was not nearly as popular as Selig's film. Footage of the Roosevelt party crossing a river just was not as exciting as a lion hunt, real or otherwise. The enormous financial success of Hunting Big Game in Africa led directly to Selig's purchase of an entire zoo for his Edendale studio and the production of a new spate of jungle adventure films featuring live animals. Hunting Big Game in Africa has been credited variously to both of Selig's most important directors, Otis Turner and Francis Boggs. Unfortunately, Boggs was murdered at the Edendale studio not long afterwards. Although SNA had made a star out of its janitor, Ben Turpin, Selig Polyscope did not have as much luck with theirs. Frank got wound to Selig's right arm. According to the Los Angeles Times, quote, "Minamatsu is thought to have nourished a trifling grudge against Boggs and to have shot Selig because the latter attempted to avert the tragedy," end quote. So Selig tried to stop the murder and got shot himself, but survived. In the century since this episode occurred, it has been widely reported that the Japanese Minamatsu was drunk and or mentally deranged at the time, and that he subsequently offered no motive for the murder to police other than that he believed Boggs to be a, quote, bad man, end quote. I wonder why that is. For his Selig biography, Andrew Arish undertook excellent detective work in determining that the incident may have been retaliation for an episode in which Boggs, known for hurling racial epithets, physically attacked Minamatsu after he had allegedly made a pass at Boggs' wife. Whatever the truth may be, Boggs had been the specific target of Minamatsu's attack, and Selig himself just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Minamatsu died in the Folsom prison in the mid-1930s. The colonel made a full recovery. The greatest movie star ever discovered by William Selig was undoubtedly rodeo rider turned actor Tom Mix, M-I-X, who made his first on-screen appearance in the Chicago-shot Selig Polyscope Western, The Cowboy Millionaire, also known as Fell Heir to $1 Million and The Millionaire Cowboy, in 1909. This is not to be confused with the 1913 Selig Polyscope film of the same title, which also starred Mix. Incredibly, Mix spent the early years of his film career alternating between acting in movies for Selig Polyscope and serving as a real-life U.S. Marshal in the town of Dewey, Oklahoma. Mix was one of the very few screen cowboys with practical cowboy experience, and his impressive ability to do his own stunts as well as his charismatic personality eventually made him the most famous Western star of the entire silent film era. In an illustration of a maxim attributed to David Bowie that, quote, "It doesn't matter who did it first, what matters is who did it second," end quote. It was not long before Mix's popularity easily eclipsed that the original cowboy star, Bronco Billy Anderson. That's funny. And Bronco Billy Anderson wasn't even trained in any of that either. He just put on the costume and went to work. Selig, like his rivals at SNA, prided himself on the authenticity of his westerns, and in fact, he had been the first motion picture producer to make films of that genre in actual western locations. Even back in Chicago, real Native Americans were frequently employed to populate Selig Polyscope's horse operas. In one memorable occasion, Sioux Indians, under their, quote, Chief Whirlwind, end quote, visited the Chicago plant to appear in the 1909 production of On the Little Bighorn, or Custer's Last Stand. According to a magazine article from the time, this cast included 3 old-timers who had actually participated in the Battle of Little Bighorn over 30 years earlier. Selig employees interrogated them extensively about the fight, but according to Superintendent Tom Nash, quote, "The most we could get from them was that the fight was over so quick that they could remember little about it. This was about all any of the Indians who were known to have been in the fight had to say. They showed us a good many details about the management of horses that we didn't know before, however," end quote. So that's pretty cool. And you know, that also brings to attention some of these other well-known battles of history. Like Custer's Last Stand was just, it was done and over so quickly that they were like, oh yeah, I don't even like remember what happened. Like, how does that happen? And then, of course, you have the film industry, like, dragging it out, making it seem like it was a much longer event. An incredible Selig Polyscope document from around this time that survives today is titled, quote, Pointers on Picture Acting, unquote. Meant as a handy guide of do's and don'ts for thespians in Selig's employ, it offers a fascinating window into how movies were made in Chicago circa 1910. And I believe they have that printed at the end of this book. So we will be getting to that eventually. We'll read that actors do and don'ts. Yeah, what was it called? Yeah, Pointers on Picture Acting, the do's and don'ts. Among the interesting tidbits in the document, actors in Selig Polyscope films were often required to create their own costumes and makeup. Quote, in the making of beards one cannot be too careful, end quote. The morality of actors' off-screen behavior was frequently dictated by the studio. Quote, let the gentleman exercise care when in the presence of ladies and children to use no profanity, end quote. And whoever composed the list of pointers clearly had a wonderful sense of humor. Quote, do not play too many parts with your sleeves rolled up. Cowboys and miners use the sleeves of their shirts for what they were intended. If you are playing tennis or courting a girl at seaside, you may display your manly beauty to your heart's content, end quote. See Appendix A for the complete text of, quote, Pointers on Picture Acting, end quote. So yeah, we're actually going to be covering Appendix A at the end of this series. I think that's going to be the last part, actually. Despite the limited commercial success of the fairy log and radio plays, William Selig continued to experiment with color, extended running times, and even sound. In 1912, taking advantage of relaxed general film company laws, he embarked on the production of a feature-length film, i.e. one running more than 40 minutes in length, about Christopher Columbus. The Coming of Columbus, that's the title, utilized replicas of Columbus's ships that had been built for the World's Fair in 1893. That's really cool. Which Selig had purchased and restored. Shot entirely in Chicago and northern Indiana, with the banks of Lake Michigan standing in for the, quote, New World, end quote. This ambitious color-tinted feature was released to great acclaim in May of 1912. After a private Vatican screening, Pope Pius X even awarded the non-Catholic colonel a medal for his efforts in, quote, providing the film industry an artistic, moral model of production, unquote. Needless to say, this gesture effectively ended the Catholic Church's previous ban on motion pictures. Selig's efforts to convince people that motion pictures could be a force for good, and that he was a, quote, beacon of light, were clearly meeting with remarkable success. The Pope was a most important convert. In February of 1914, Selig teamed up with theatrical agent William Morris to make a series of short, quote, singing and talking, end quote, films with synchronized soundtracks that starred the Scottish comedian and singer Harry Lauder, Lauder, and a William Morris client, who had recently finished a phenomenally successful U.S. tour. While Lauder was passing through Chicago in February 1914, he went to the Selig plant and recorded 17 short films, as well as a 300-footer featuring Lauder and Selig himself, though this one does not seem to have been released. The, quote, talkers, end quote, showed Lauder singing Scottish tunes such as I Love a Lassie, When I Get Back to Bonnie, Scotland, and Roman in the Gloamin'. Selig and Lauder both seemed pleased with the results. Selig wrote, quote, I have seen the positives of all the Lauder films. Part of these were projected in accompaniment with the records. The synchronism was perfect, and Mr. Lauder himself was greatly elated because of the success, end quote. These talkers also enjoyed commercial and critical success in the spring of 1914, at least for a while. The program was highly touted in the trade papers, including Variety, in which a reviewer wrote, quote, the Lauder singing and talking pictures appear to have well nigh reached perfection in lingual and optical synchronization. In the Lauder's talkers, the art of the famous Scottish comedian is reproduced in marvelously real fashion, end quote. Unfortunately, a complex combination of technical and financial problems, as well as legal disputes between Selig and Morris, soon brought the theatrical run of the Lauder films to an end. For once, Colonel Selig was perhaps too far ahead of his time. It would not be for another 13 years that audiences would be able to regularly enjoy talking pictures. Selig did, however, arguably achieve his greatest successes around this time with two other series of films. The Adventures of Kathleen, the first American cliffhanger serial, and the Hearst Selig News Pictorial, a landmark newsreel. On December 29, 1913, Selig Polyscope debuted the first episode of The Adventures of Kathleen. It's either Kathleen or Kathleen, but it's spelled Kathlyn. A 13-part serial starring its most popular leading lady, Kathleen Williams, directly inspired by the Biograph Company's promotion of Florence Lawrence. Selig Polyscope promoted the golden-haired Williams, originally discovered by D.W. Griffith as the Selig Girl. The Adventures of Kathleen detailed the adventures of the eponymous heroine, a young woman who, in order to save her father's life, becomes an unlikely Indian queen, menaced by both wild animals and a villain played by Charles Clary. The series, boasting the tagline, quote, a wild animal melodrama, end quote, won instant popularity, and subsequent episodes were released on a bi-monthly basis over the next half year. Although other American studios had made earlier serials, Selig's was the first to feature suspenseful, open endings in an attempt to lure viewers back to the theater week after week to see future installments. Selig had borrowed the basic cliffhanger conceit from master filmmaker Louis Feuillade. So his last name spelled Feuillade, whose pioneering Fantomas serial, spelled Fantomas, with an accent over the O, had premiered in France the previous April and received distribution in the United States by Gaumont in the summer of 1913. And Gaumont is spelled Gaumont. The Adventures of Kathleen was itself soon widely imitated. It was the template for The Perils of Pauline and countless other American cliffhangers to follow. It is hard to overstate how phenomenally popular motion pictures were in 1914. In an era before the advent of television and commercial radio, not to mention long before the internet and video games, There was simply no other form of audiovisual entertainment with which the movies had to compete. Movies were actually more popular than they are today in terms of the number of tickets sold, and Kathleen Williams was as popular as any movie star of the era. Moving Picture World wrote of fans waiting in line for hours, even in the notoriously bad Chicago winter weather, to attend the latest Kathleen serial. The Daily Tribune office had to answer hundreds of inquiries every day regarding where Kathleen would be screening on certain days because, quote, thousands who missed the first installments are anxious to learn where they may see the first part of the interesting subject, end quote. I'm going to pause here for a moment. I kind of want to look up what this actress looked like and just show it on screen here. But we may have a photograph in the book, so I'll wait about doing that. The Adventures of Kathleen made Williams so famous that there were soon a clothing line, a cocktail, and even a dance, the Kathleen Waltz, named for her. The down-to-earth Williams never let the success go to her head, however, in contrast to, say, Frances X. Bushman. She made it clear in an interview that she personally read her own fan mail. Quote, I appreciate so much the letters I get, particularly those from children, because it means so much effort when a child is enough interested to make the trouble to write, and then I like the suggesting letters, which are really very helpful. I have had some on gowns and different things that have been of great assistance to me, end quote. Williams also noted that she saw an opportunity for films to improve, just as theatrical producers were now, she said, being forced to put on better plays in order to compete with motion pictures. She even announced, in the course of talking up her film Ne'er-Do-Well to Chicago newspapers, was that what she really wanted to do was direct, making one of her first movie stars to utter the now iconic phrase, quote, I really want to direct, end quote. That it was Kathleen Williams making the statement was notable, as female directors were, in the phrase of the Daily Tribune reviewer Kitty Kelly, quote, an undiscovered species, end quote. Quote, women can direct just as well as men, end quote, Williams said. Quote, and in the matter of much of the planning, they would be more successful because they often have a keener artistic sense and more of an eye for detail. And so often, it is just one tiny thing, 5 feet of film maybe, that quite spoils a picture, but for it is always the little bit of unpleasantness that one remembers. Women have shown that they can do a great many things men can. Of course, there are some things they can't, but then they don't want to. But they have had to work hard for all they have achieved, end quote. What was remarkable was that interview leaves out that Catherine had already directed a two-reeler for Selig, The Leopard's Foundling, a jungle adventure that hit theaters 2 weeks after the last installment of The Adventures of Kathleen. According to a long synopsis published in the papers, it tells the tale of a girl separated from her family on safari, then raised by leopards in the African veldt. Kathleen played the jungle girl who winds up captured, bound, and tied to the back of an elephant by a man who falls in love with her in time for her to save him from being eaten by leopards. The happy couple then marries, and Kathleen's character, Balu, performs several comedic scenes upon re-entering society. Isn't Balu the name of that Jungle Book bear? Mowgli and Balu? It was a lot of story to cram into a two-reader. Or a two-reeler. According to advertisements, Williams both wrote and directed it as well as starred in it. Kathleen Williams is genius, one ad proclaimed. Quote, is not confined to acting. She takes rank today with the leading scenario writers and motion picture producers in the world. In The Leopard's Foundling... Why am I saying leopards? It's a leopard. Forgive me for that, I'm sorry. In The Leopard's Foundling, she has produced a play in jungle dangers, intense dramatic climaxes that reveals the most thrilling scenes in the entire Adventures of Kathleen series. End quote. The surviving stills show Kathleen dressed as one would expect, in a tattered rag dress, stalking through dense brush. Some modern sources state that Francis J. Grandin, Grandon, co-directed the film, but his name is absent from any available contemporary notices. The banner of the ad says, quote, Kathleen's own play, end quote, and the copyright information dated June 11th, 1914, notes that it was written and produced by Miss Williams. Many ads for the picture made a point of stating that Kathleen directed it, although female directors in Europe were not unheard of, one of whom, Frances Alice Guy Blanche, opened her own studio in the U.S. in 1910. Williams was one of the very first American-born women to direct. The movie also seems to have been a success artistically. Though there are few reviews, the Cleveland Plain Dealer noted that, quote, it possesses originality and also possesses some amount of probability, which was not one of the strong points of the serial thriller, end quote. It was also noted that the second reel contained, quote, excellent comedy as she objects to corsets and is a bitter foe of shoes and stockings. Her adventures with a piano are highly amusing, both in the wild scenes of the jungle and in the later transformation. Miss Williams performs most convincingly. It is one of the best parts she has ever taken. When a tiny little girl, baby Lillian Wade, lies down among the leopards and apparently goes to sleep, one fancies that the limit of cinematographic realism has been reached. In a production of much general excellence, the only possible adverse criticism is that the photography of some of the scenes is not as clear as it might be. In 1915, when asked by Photoplay if women could direct, Williams spoke of having directed, quote, 2 or 3, end quote, photoplays. Quote, one in particular, Balu, the Leopard's Foundling, was a great success. I wrote the play, produced it, and took the lead, a wild girl brought up with leopards. There were some excellent effects in it, and the leopard ran at me and put its head on my shoulder at the right moment. Isn't that enough for you? End quote. The interviewer replied, quote, not quite. What are your likes and dislikes? End quote. And Williams responded with, quote, I dislike being interviewed, for one, and housework for another. End quote. By this time, Williams was certainly a sensation. The Daily Tribune often published an, quote, answers to movie fans, end quote, section that would include the answers to letters, though not the letters themselves, the content of which could easily be guessed. The April 26, 1914 installment shows that letters about Catherine came in constantly. Answers that day included, quote, Miss Marion. So I guess this is from Miss Marion. No. Oh, hold on. No, this is Kathleen answering Miss Marion. No, Kathleen is not married to Bruce in real. End quote. I like that. Instead of just saying, like, today, like, we're saying for real. We're saying this for real. They just say, in real. As opposed to fake real, like the movies, right? Quote, here's another response to a woman named Vita from Catherine. Yes, Kathleen Williams has lived in Chicago, end quote. And, quote, and this is another letter addressed to CP, the initials. Aside from The Adventures of Kathleen, Kathleen Williams has played in The Young Mrs. Eames, E-A-M-E-S, The Coming of Columbus, The Leopard's Foundling, and numerous other Selig productions, end quote. This column was printed nearly 2 months before The Leopard's Foundling was released. It had been in production for some time. The August 1913 issue of Motion Picture Magazine mentioned it in its, quote, Green Room Jottings, end quote, column, stating that, quote, Kathleen Williams is probably the first actress to write, direct, and play in a photoplay, end quote. 1914 was a good year for Colonel Selig, his last truly good year as a film producer. In 1912, he had finally won over the Chicago Daily Tribune by contracting with them to publish, quote, photoplays in story form, end quote. Essentially, the Daily Tribune published the plots of Selig Polyscope's movies as short stories on an entire page of their Sunday edition. The Daily Tribune may have been won over less by Selig's preaching than by the boost in circulation they got, but it was clear that by 1912 they saw some literary merits in the stories told by motion pictures. In 1914, the serialized, quote, novelization, end quote, of The Adventures of Kathleen took this concept to a whole new level. The Kathleen novelization not only capitulated the cliffhanger serial to new heights of popularity, but also greatly raised the Daily Tribune's circulation by as much as an astonishing 10%, according to some estimates. The Daily Tribune's embracing of movies, in turn, helped the motion picture medium finally to become completely acceptable to the middle and upper classes. Selig Polyscope's Western studio was thriving at this time as well. The April 1914 release of the Gold Rush epic The Spoilers, also starring Kathleen Williams, but shot in Edendale and its surrounding environs, and that's the word, environs, E-N-V-I-R-O-N-S, would prove to be Selig's biggest ever financial success. The Spoilers also has the distinction of being the first 2-hour feature-length film produced in America, as it is the best and almost only surviving example of Kathleen Williams' work. Another collaboration with the Fourth Estate came in the form of Hearst Selig News Pictorial, the first weekly newsreel which debuted in early 1914. The pictorial covered a wide variety of news topics, from social problems to celebrity gossip, and even included one amusing episode in which Colonel Selig and partner William Randolph Hearst were seen talking on telephones and alternating shots, allegedly discussing their newsreel with each other. The pictorial ultimately instituted many of the conventions that would become standard in filmed and televised news, such as using Hearst columnists as, quote, on-camera reporters, end quote. So that's interesting. So they took news columnists and turned them into news reporters. Like, I'd never even thought of that, how that all came to be, but that's pretty cool. Millions of Americans were reading Hearst papers at this time, and the newspaper tycoon's name on a newsreel was, for many, a guarantee of both quality and authenticity. Indeed, many of the non-Hearst-owned trade papers raved about the pictorial. Typical was this gushing review from Motography. So I guess that was a magazine or newspaper. Motography. Quote, "No staging, no make-believe, no play acting, just the actual drama of life, with its heroes, unconscious of their audience, snapped into the great crises of the world's events, and their every look, every gesture, every moment brought from the uttermost ends of the earth and flashed upon your theater screen," end quote. Although William Randolph Hearst's origins in dubious, quote, yellow journalism, end quote, were legendary, and William Selig had made his share of faux documentaries, Motography's superlatives were somewhat justified. In the late summer of 1914, a Hearst Selig camera crew traveled to Europe to document the war-ravaged city of Louvain, Belgium. This footage, screened in the United States in October, contained what may have been the earliest non-faked filmed images of World War I. Justifiably proud of this war coverage, Selig and Hearst soon took out epic advertisements extolling the visceral nature of their newsreels. Quote, "Get in there, woman, child, and man, get in line. There's your place. March in step with the soldiers in this bloodiest of wars. If you want to know what war is like, well, come in and see it in all its grim realism. You will go through all the havoc, charge with the chargers, shoot with the shooters. The cannon will yawn and spit at you. The shot will drop at your feet." End quote. Less than 2 years later, and for reasons never made public, Hearst switched allegiances, signing a new deal with American Vitagraph to produce a new newsreel, the Hearst Vitagraph Daily Pictorial. The rift with William Randolph Hearst ultimately wounded Colonel Selig more than Frank Minamatsu's bullet. Although Selig later claimed that he had instigated the dissolution of his partnership with Hearst, existing records indicate that the opposite was actually true. It's a case of, I fire you, no, I quit, type of thing. Or someone says, I quit, no, I fire you. In this case, with Selig. Along with the U.S. Justice Department's litigation of the Motion Picture Patents Company, this rift signaled the beginning of an irreversible decline in Selig's movie empire. And with that is the end of chapter 9. So we have these photographs to look at in here. So we're not quite done yet today, but we are near the end. So I'll be here. I'll check the comments here. I see you all still here. Okay. So the first photograph in the book here for chapter 9 says Selig Polyscope movie set of an interior of a house. And it's from the Chicago Daily News, 1914. And the photo is courtesy of the Chicago History Museum. So it's showing one of his sets here. And then next we have The Count of Monte Cristo, 1908, directed by Francis Boggs and Thomas Persons. Just have a single still from that. Then we have 3 stills from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz from 1910, directed by Otis Turner. And I believe it mentioned in this chapter this was the second Wizard of Oz film that was ever made. There we go. You see the Tin Man has a long nose. So they modified that look for the Judy Garland one eventually. And you know, the ties between like MGM and the Lion and Selig and the Wizard of Oz, like this is all really fascinating. How that all plays into each other. Then next we have Tom Mix, Selig Polyscope's most important discovery, swinging a lasso in Chicago's Soldier Field. And this is from the Chicago Daily News, circa 1928. And it is courtesy of the Chicago History Museum. And it looks like just lasso demonstration in front of children here. I'm doing my best to get it to focus in. It's not wanting to. But you get the picture. It's pretty clear for the most part. But that is it for today. I hope you all enjoyed it. Next week, we will be covering chapter 10 of this book. Titled S&A Signs, Charlie Chaplin. So that'll be what we'll be covering next week. And this series is running with this book. I have it planned through the end of June. So I hope you're all enjoying it. I'm doing a little bit of adjustments here with how I present things. So I'm really Really appreciative of you guys being here. But that'll do it for today, and until the next one, class dismissed.